Leslie Hiner is going to be giving the first presentation here. She's an attorney. She's Vice President of Legal Affairs at EdChoice. She's an advocate of education freedom, a crusader fighting for the unencumbered opportunity of parents to decide how and where their children will be educated. She believes in the power of individuals to change the world and believes personal liberty will be enhanced when our method of funding K-12 education is changed to empower parents and students before institutions. Yes, very good. And she, before I go on, she wanted to make sure that you all know that she was involved in starting. She helped start a charter school in her hometown of Indianapolis, and a lot of great folks involved in the charter school movement. I personally also was involved in starting up a virtual charter school here in New Mexico. As Vice President of Legal Affairs at EdChoice, the nation's leading education choice organization, Leslie leads the EdChoice Legal Defense and Education Center for this nonpartisan charitable nonprofit and engages with other national organizations to support school choice. She's a proven leader advancing educational freedom and choice for all as a pathway to successful lives and a stronger society. Hiner is an attorney with extensive state legislative and executive branch experience. In Indiana, she was the first woman chief of staff to the Speaker of the House, counsel to the Senate President Pro Tem, and general counsel / elections deputy to the Secretary of State. She's also a former small business owner and litigator in private practice. Please welcome Leslie Hiner.
Good morning. It is a beautiful day to be here in Albuquerque. Thank you, Paul, for inviting me to be here. You ordered up the weather just perfectly. And thank you to Oak. Thank you also to Rio Grande and everyone who helped make this day possible. Now, as beautiful as it is here in Albuquerque and in this lovely place, what's really beautiful, and the thing that matters more than anything else, is each one of you. You are here not because you didn't have anything better to do today. You are here specifically to learn, to share information, and we all share one purpose, and that is to help kids find the kind of educational environment and learning environment that works for them. That's it. I like to tell people that it's not really rocket science. The simplicity of school choice is, I think, its greatest virtue. When you see that a child who is failing terribly in one school can go to a different school and blossom, the joy in that is infectious, and it's wonderful, and it's inspiring, and frankly, for me, it makes me want to do more, because I know there are other kids out there who need to walk into a different school so that they can learn. So today, you're going to be hearing from a lot of really smart people who have a lot of really great data they've worked on very hard. They'll be presenting a lot of valuable information to you. And I know that they're all using PowerPoints, or often do. So I elected to not do that this morning, but instead I'd like to have more of a conversation with you to set the tone of how it is that we got to this point, and here we are in Albuquerque advocating for kids. How did this happen? So for me, I have some firsthand knowledge about this because I started advocating for educational choice what is now a really long time ago, in the mid-1980s. Now, keep in mind, before I go further with this, the very first voucher program happened in Vermont, our very first voucher state. People are usually shocked when I tell them it's Vermont, but it's true. They still have it today. In 1869, they began. And they were followed shortly thereafter in 1873 by the state of Maine. So the idea that parents should play an outsized role in deciding how and where their children are educated started pretty early. Now, along about the mid-1950s, 1955 in particular, is when Milton Friedman came along, and he was asked to take a look at how we fund K-12 education in this country. Great economist, right up his alley. But when he did, he was shocked by what he found. He discovered that the way that we fund education, the way we funded it in 1955, which, by the way, is the way we fund it today, is a socialist economic model. And he could hardly believe it. He said, how can this be that we have a socialist formula for funding education in a free market society where we value individuals and their decisions over institutions? So this is when he came up with the idea for a solution. He was a guy who liked to come up with solutions, and this one was a good one. This is the one that guides all of us today. Simply this: the legislature in every state across the country has a constitutional obligation to provide public schools that are funded. That's not changing anytime soon. But he reasoned this. So you take the money that the legislature appropriates for each child's education, and then put the parents in the position of deciding how and where to use that funding. Simple idea that would work. That is actually the essence of all of school choice, that parents are placed in that position to make the decision about what happens to their kids, who educates them, how they're educated, how that's done. That simple idea is what has brought us to today. And I'll flesh this out for you along the way, so there's more to this story. So for me, in 1986, I was a young lawyer, and I was working at a firm as a young lawyer where I took everybody who walked in the door, every case. I wanted to learn. It was a pretty difficult but exciting time. And one day there was a woman who walked in with her 15-year-old daughter, and she said she had been divorced, and she and her ex were having a disagreement on how their daughter would be educated. So here's the situation. They belonged to an evangelical church, and that church had a school that they'd had for some time. This young girl had gone to that school K through 8, and now she was about to start into high school. However, the prior year there had been a divorce, and the husband had become an alcoholic, led to the divorce, also led to his rupture with their church. So after that happened, he decided that he didn't want his daughter to go to the school of that church where he had had a break in relations. And so he sued in what's typically called a post-dissolution action. Typically in post-dissolution actions, lawyers show up with their clients in court, and judge says, counsel, take your clients, go into chambers, you have 30 minutes, work it out, come out, show me your suggestions. Well, that didn't work so well with my client. Because when I asked her this question, now, your husband has taken the position that the government, the school boards, that's who should decide where their daughter would go to school. At her position, when I asked her, is there any room for compromise here? Could we work together? And she said, over my dead body. So, okay, we were done with that conversation. That's where she was. And when we got to court, the judge also, when we told him we would have to go to trial, and he was not amused by this, asked her the same question, and she gave the judge the very same answer, which he also didn't like, but tough. So we had a 5-day trial. And during that 5-day trial, I learned everything that I could find about private education because I didn't know anything. I knew there was a Catholic high school in the town where I grew up, but I didn't know anybody who went there. I had never met anyone who went to a private school until I went to college, and it still just seemed something that was foreign to me. It was all public schools for me. So I had to learn. Now that was a little bit after A Nation at Risk came out. The report showing that our public schools were in deep, deep trouble. The achievement levels for our kids were just, were really heading in the wrong direction, and we had to fix it. So I began to learn, yeah, I think there's a problem here. I'm beginning to get this now. And one of my best teachers was this mother, my client. Well, the day came for the decision in the case. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And we won, yay, it was great. It was this magical moment. I was so excited that first, as a young lawyer, I was super excited. And my client was just, for the mother, she just knew, yes, this is the right decision. So the girl went on to school. Well, that evening, I had put so much time into this case that I decided I better watch the evening news and see what's happening in the world, because I didn't really know at that point. So I did, sit back, poured a glass of wine, decided I'd just relax, celebrate a little. The top story on the news that night was about a shooting. There were some kids at a local high school who, when they got on the bus to go home, they got into an argument and they started shooting each other. Now, to this day, I still get goosebumps over that moment because the moment when that happened was the moment when the judge ruled in our favor, and that is the school that my client's daughter would have attended the very next day had I lost that case. Now, in that moment, I knew that everything that mother taught me about the importance of parents understanding their children and knowing what will work for them and what will not work for them was right. My best lessons came from that client. And I find even today, if I'm stumped about anything, I can talk to a parent and I'm probably going to get, I'll be lifted up and I'll get the information that I need to keep going. So from that point forward, I just couldn't turn my back on what I had learned. And so I continued to advocate in my own personal capacity. And then when I went on, as Paul said, I was counsel at the House and Senate in Indiana. So there I had an opportunity to get more involved and help advocate for charters, for vouchers, for all forms of educational choice. So when I got started in advocating for this, we didn't really have a national movement. There were people in a lot of states, though, who they had read A Nation at Risk, and we all knew it was true. People were trying very hard to figure out what to do. And then finally, things started to come together. In Indiana, we started our formal school choice coalition in 1996. We wanted charters, we wanted vouchers. Those were the two things in particular that we wanted. We passed a tax credit scholarship bill in Indiana in 2009. So it took us from 1996 until 2009 to get our first educational choice program. And that was followed up 2 years later in 2011 when we passed the nation's biggest voucher program. It was the biggest at that time. So I'm telling you this story because this nice man over here, who so graciously invited me to be here, Paul Gessing and Rio Grande Foundation. When I first joined EdChoice, which was 15 years ago, Paul had a fleggling organization with Rio Grande, and he was full of energy, and he was just really going to go, but he was just getting started. That was 17 years ago, and he's still here. He's still standing. He's still working. So I'm sharing this information for you so that you understand that when you bring school choice, any of these education innovations to a state, that it takes time. You don't convince people overnight to adopt something that seems very different to them, and that they kind of think maybe it's a good idea, but they are not sure. So it takes time to reach people. The most important thing that you can do is to reach out to your neighbors. I'll give you a challenge now. For each one of you here today, you're going to learn a lot today. And if there's any little piece of today that resonates with you, I challenge you when you go home to call 10 of your friends. Tell them what you learned. And when you're done telling them what you learned here today, ask each one of them to call 10 of their friends and do the same and share this information. It's a simple step. I've seen people in states who would go home, make a coffee cake, make some coffee, invite the neighbors over. That's great. However you want to do it. Sharing this information is that one thing that will make you successful. When people know the power of parents being empowered and funded to make the decisions for their children on how and where they're educated, once they know it, they like it. And it's been my experience in all these years that once people, they get it, or then they have choice in their own states, they realize, yeah, we're not giving this up anytime soon. This is worth keeping. The largest voucher program that was adopted by a country was adopted by Sweden years ago in the 90s. And the mayor of Stockholm said, you know, Sweden's a pretty peaceful place. They have never been good on offense. They've always been about military defense, and they like to be neutral and kind of quiet, except for that one time when they had a change in administration in Sweden, and one of the first things they wanted to do was to get rid of the voucher program, which every family in Sweden enjoyed. He said, that's the closest time that Sweden came to having a real revolution. Parents stood up and said, oh no, 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 you're not taking this away from my child. There's a lot of power in that. Realize your own power. When you bring these opportunities to parents and their children, you are sharing that power with them. And collectively, you'll be amazed at what you can do. I'm here to tell you that I've seen this all over the country. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what's going on across the country. Back in 15 years ago, in 2008, when I first joined EdChoice, we all got together to plot what we were going to do for the next year. Carrie Hunter, who is here, was part of this. And we sat at our president's kitchen table and we planned our activities for the next year. And that was just 15 years ago, mind you. Yeah, we can't do that today. We keep buying bigger conference tables at the office because we have to expand because the states are so active in moving forward educational choice. Now, when we count a state as being a school choice state, we include, for example, Minnesota. Minnesota has a tax credit and a tax deduction, and parents use that money to offset their costs to educate their children, again, however they choose. Illinois had, for years and years, they've had the most successful individual tax credit for parents. And I think last time I checked, the amount was maybe $500 that a parent could get in a tax credit to offset education expenses. And they have, for many years, had well over 300,000 people in that state access that tax credit and use it for their kids' education. So we count any one of these states that has taken the step to help parents access the education that they need for their kids. Now, that said, what that means is that we now have 32 states, plus DC, plus Puerto Rico, that have some form of school choice. That's a lot. There are only 16 states, okay, now we're looking at it the other way, who doesn't have school choice? There are just 16 states. I want you to hear who they are. California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Idaho, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Dakota, Oregon, Texas, Washington, and Wyoming. And of those states, I think we're likely to see choice in the short term, maybe 2 to 4 years, in Colorado, Idaho, North Dakota, Oregon, maybe Texas. It's still a long shot with Texas. They're a little difficult. and Wyoming. So suddenly, we start looking at literally just a handful of states who have not yet adopted school choice. In addition to that, the number of states that have adopted universal choice, or darn close to universal choice, now that accounts for 20% of all the states. There's a day when we were waiting for that one state that would be universal, and that could be our role model. Again, like I said, there are a lot of us who have been working on this for a long time, but those role models now exist. And so the one thing that you should know here as you're doing your own work to advance school choice is to understand that the people in these other states who have done this and who are making these programs work, they are all your best friends. The people who've worked on this, moms, businesses, organizations, they are all available to help you. And this is something where people have come together. I think really the main reason why it is that we really call this a school choice family, what really unites us, is this common mission. We're all very clear that none of the stuff that we do has much of anything to do with us, but it has everything to do with the parents and the kids that we're serving and the future of the country. My kids are older now. They're in their 30s, thinking about starting families. And so now my vision starts shifting into, okay, wait, they're gonna have kids? I wanna make sure that those kids get every opportunity, whatever it is, they have options. It's not gonna be a problem. It's just going to be the norm. It should be the norm in every state that everybody understands when they start a family, they know that their kids are going to be educated and they don't worry about it. That should be the norm. Parents should not have to worry about where their kids might be assigned to go to school and whether that's going to be a good experience or whether their kids are going to be some of those kids that teachers will call the ghost children in the back of the room that nobody really pays attention to them because they're just too difficult to teach. They're not going to learn, and they don't learn. Is your child going to be one of those children? Or are you as a parent going to have the power and the ability to actually do something about that, besides having to move, having to work 3 jobs or whatever it is, to move someplace that you don't want to be so your child can access the education that your child needs. There was a US Supreme Court case in 1925 called Pierce versus Society of Sisters. The situation in 1925 was this. It was in Oregon. And a lot about that time, across the country, there was a movement for compulsory education. Now, compulsory education meant that kids should be in school for a certain number of years, that they should have a body of education, that's what would be necessary for a child then to become a successful adult, be able to function in society. However, oftentimes, with a really common sense idea, there may come along somebody who wants to take it too far. And somebody did back in the early 1920s. I said, well, maybe we should say instead that children must go to public schools and only public schools. Well, so they did that in Oregon. Funny thing, all of a sudden the private schools were out of business. They were educating a whole lot of kids. So there were a lot of people in Oregon who didn't like that very much. There were some nuns at a school where it was one of the schools where the Catholic Church had done the outreach to bring in children from difficult backgrounds. They were definitely serving the poor in this school. And they weren't willing, again, like so many of us with choice, they weren't willing to turn their backs on these kids. They just wouldn't do it. So they sued. Went all the way up to the US Supreme Court. And the US Supreme Court said, children are not the mere creatures of the state. They went on to say that no child in this country is required to be educated by a public school teacher. And furthermore, the parents have both the natural and the constitutional right to decide how and where their children are educated, and that is the parents' duty. That case has been good law now for almost 100 years. It is still, to this day, often cited in numerous cases. So there's no question about where the law stands on the rights of parents. The only time it gets a little murky is when you get into state courts and your judges, well, I'm an attorney, so let me just say this, and your judges are not yet aware of some other case law and some other facts and circumstances, so we make it our business to make them aware. New Mexico, you actually have played a pivotal role recently in litigation. There was a case about half a dozen years ago that arose first out of Missouri, the Trinity Lutheran case, and it was a simple thing. The state had some leftover rubber pieces that it's really good to use for playgrounds, and so they decided to distribute this as a grant program, and anybody could apply. So Trinity Lutheran, they had a big playground. They had a preschool, a lot of little kids going to the church there. And they did a blind application process. So people who were evaluating it didn't know at first who submitted their applications. And Trinity Lutheran, I think they said that was like the third or fourth best application. They did a great job. Until the state realized, ooh, that's a religious school. Ooh, well, we can't do this. You can't get any money from the state. No, you can't do that. And they were out. Well, they didn't take too kindly to that, and they sued. And that case went up to the US Supreme Court. And the US Supreme Court said that when a state rejects a religious entity from a neutral public benefit program, just because that entity is religious. That is odious to our Constitution. Those are John Roberts' words, odious. He's used those words a few different times. I kind of like it. So that was the decision. Now, shortly thereafter, there was a case that came up from here, New Mexico, with the textbook loan program. And your folks here said, well, the state will appropriate money to give to schools so that they can loan textbooks and materials to the kids. Yeah, we used to do that to the public schools and the private schools, but we've got those religious schools, and we're not going to do that anymore. Well, that was a problem. So your Supreme Court said no, said that because you have a provision in your Constitution that says that the state shall never fund any religious or private schools, so religious or secular schools, that these kids were out of luck for textbooks. Sorry, you got to find another way to get textbooks for your kids. There was a lawsuit, went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court, in classic fashion, didn't say much about it, really actually didn't say anything at all, but instead said, we vacate that decision entirely of the New Mexico Supreme Court, and we're sending it back down to the state so you can try again. So the court said, now look at this in light of the Trinity Lutheran decision. So that was what we call in the legal profession a smackdown by the U.S. Supreme Court. They've been doing that a lot lately, and they did that to the New Mexico Supreme Court. So then we had a different ruling that came out of New Mexico Supreme Court and said, well, I think maybe we can reconcile this. Now the issue is simply this, that in your state, you have a constitution that is the law of the land here. However, each one of us, we also have rights under the U.S. Constitution. And if there's anything in your state constitution that takes from you the rights that are guaranteed to you by the federal Constitution, that provision in your state constitution cannot stand. So we now have seen two other cases that have gone up, one from Montana, the other one from the state of Maine, Espinoza versus the Montana Department of Revenue. Montana passed tax credit scholarship program. Department of Revenue that was administering it said, well, okay, but no religious schools. We're not going to do that. One of the parents who had elected to participate and send her children to religious school, she was one of these parents who was just really, this was her last straw. She had been divorced, she'd struggled to make a living, she had the two girls, both of her girls were bullied terribly in her public school, and nobody really cared. Because her girls did a little Bible study at recess. As one of her girls told me, Mrs. Hiner, you can only swing on a swing set so many times until, it's just not that much fun anymore. So the girls decided to have a little Bible study there at recess, and they were bullied terribly, and nobody cared. So the girls started to fail horribly. Until then, this mother was able to get them into a religious school, and they felt comfortable, they felt valued, they fit in, and they started to thrive again, and everything was fine. So she's the one she's the Espinoza in Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue. Took that case up to the U.S. Supreme Court again, got a bad ruling out of Montana's Supreme Court that said, much like New Mexico's Supreme Court said, well, our state constitution is a little stricter on separating government and religion than the U.S. Constitution. So we're going to stick with that. And they said, there could be some cases where maybe the U.S. Constitution would trump what we're doing here in the state, but we don't think so here. It's not one of those cases. So when they got up to the US Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court said, oh yeah, this is one of those cases. Your provision in your state constitution cannot override the free exercise rights of parents if they choose a religious school versus a secular school, if that's their choice. Understand, that's their choice, and that's protected by the free exercise clause of the First Amendment to the US Constitution. So their prohibiting language in their state constitution, it's not worth the paper it's written on at this point. It cannot be enforced. There was another case that arose out of Maine. It was a similar fact pattern, except for this. The state of Maine, they were a little cute by half and said, okay, so we'll allow religious schools to participate just as long as they don't do anything religious. Then we're fine. Well, yeah, that was interesting. So got up to the Supreme Court again, and boom, big smackdown again by the US Supreme Court. They were not amused by that at all and said, look, we already told you can't exclude religious schools just because they're religious. Don't think that now you can come along and say, yeah, but they spend it for religious stuff, and we'll say that it's okay. It's not okay. It is really not okay. Religious schools do religious things. That's why people send them there, because there's an appeal there. And by the way, it's the parents' choice. And they own that choice. And especially when the parents, it's all voluntary. If a parent wants to participate in a school choice program, that's completely the parent's choice. You could have a school choice program and nobody participate because it is voluntary. If the parent decides that a religious school is the right school or secular school is the right school, or now, as you'll learn about later with micro schools that are wonderful, and it's the parent's choice. And every parent in this country has that right. We have that freedom. What we're up against is that not enough people know it. So when I say to you, talk to your friends, ask them to talk to their friends, I am very serious about this. This is what's important. People don't know their rights. If you don't know your rights, then school choice can look, oh, I don't know, another policy, I don't know, is it political? It's not, I don't know. No, it's none of that. It's your right. And that's what we're fighting for here. So, New Mexico, you've been struggling now for a while. Your kids have been struggling. And I'm struck by this fact. As I mentioned to you, Paul and Rio Grande, they've been around now for 17 years. You do have charter schools, and they need to have no cap. They need to keep going. That's another form of choice. It's a good one. But it strikes me that in 17 years, what this means is that an entire generation of children in New Mexico have passed by. And of that generation, there will be a far too high percentage of those kids who are undereducated. And their attempts to live a successful adult life will fail for many of them, and the rest will struggle. When you're in a situation where your achievement levels in the state are the lowest in the country, and the percentage of kids who are actually at grade level in their learning hovers around 20%. 80% of kids, when they leave school, are not on grade level. So what does that mean? That means that if they get a job, they may not have enough reading and comprehension skills to be able to read an instruction booklet. They may not have the math skills to be able to complete a bill of lading. These are fundamental skills that each person should possess. But you have far too many kids who aren't getting that. And they deserve it. They deserve that. Education is talked about by everyone by being a high value. Well, it is, as long as we work for that value and we make it work every day. It may take 17 years, may take over 20 years like Indiana, may take a long time. But here's what I think is the secret. You really want to be successful. At every step, you're going to have long days, you're going to have hard days, you're going to talk to legislators who don't want to talk to you. That happens. But always keep in front of you, in your mind's eye, a picture of a child. Picture of a child who needs this. And when the going gets tough, people start calling you names, get out of my office, or whatever it is. Just reflect again on that child and understand that the children today, they're going to be leading this state very soon. Those 17 years have passed really quickly, really fast. In the blink of an eye, those kids who are undereducated will be leading the state. You have some work to do. But I'm here to tell you that I am certain that you can do this. There's really not a doubt in my mind. Frankly, I wouldn't be here talking to you today if I doubted that. I don't doubt that, not at all. I've been absolutely convinced by the people that I have met here in New Mexico that you know what you want, you know what you need, you know your rights, you know the rights of these kids, and look, you're here. You're here. You're taking time out of your days today to listen to me yammer on and talk to you about things, and you'll hear a lot of other people, and you don't have to be here, but you are. So first, as someone who's seen an awful lot of children who went from absolute failure in their lives to blossoming into highly productive and really happy kids who are doing great, went on with their lives, I'm here to tell you that it's worth it. And all the people that you're going to meet here today who will bring some information to you, they agree with that. We have a very common mission. So also know, just as I said, that there are people in other states who've been working on this, and they are certainly willing to help you. So are we. So don't ever hesitate, not for a minute, to reach out. When we do this together, it's better, maybe a little quicker, and it's all possible. So thank you very much for this opportunity today. I'm on the Go New Mexico team. Okay, let's go get this done for your kids. Thank you.
About 5 minutes for Q&A, so if anybody has a question, be sure to speak up, but a couple minutes here, so any questions?
Sure.
I'm curious, is there any evidence that any states with strong school choice, whether the public schools have improved?
Oh, so the question is whether public schools improve. Have the public schools improved their quality after choices come to town? Yes, absolutely. There's a rather dramatic chart that I saw some years ago from Florida. And Florida was once where you are today. They were at the bottom of achievement for all states, and they sat there for a really, really long time. Then they adopted choice, and they actually could track, or they did track, the progression of achievement in that state. So they passed a voucher program, and they saw achievement begin to rise rather dramatically. But then they had a Supreme Court ruling that said they couldn't do vouchers in Florida. they stopped. Suddenly, that line dropped like a rock. So here's the story behind that. When any school administrator, any teacher knows that the kids can be in your classroom or not, or they can go away, well, it's just human nature to want to be good. I want to be a little better than the other guy. I don't want to keep these kids in your classroom. You want to keep them in your school. So first, human nature just kicks in. People want to do a little better, and they do. But as soon as you take that away, then there's not so much initiative there to want to do better, because it won't matter. Parents have to send their kids there to your school, one way or the other. Okay, then that's it. Then that's the end game. I saw this personally in Indianapolis shortly after we passed the voucher program. One of the superintendents of one of our largest public school districts in Indianapolis approached me at a conference. And I will say, just like in every state, the teachers' unions will be against you, the Association of Superintendents, they'll be against you, secondary school principals will be against you. These are national organizations that guide people who are on the ground in states. And so this guy was not for vouchers until after we passed it. And then he came up to me. I didn't know if he was going to hit me or what, but he didn't hit me. Instead, he extended his hand. He said he wanted to shake my hand so that he could thank me for the work that I did in passing vouchers in Indiana. And I was quite speechless at that moment. It's like, okay, you have to tell me why. Why are you thanking me? And he said it's simply this. He believed in his teachers. He really loved his teachers. And he thought they had really great teachers at his school. He had a big school district and just believed in them. And so he'd tell everybody, we have really great teachers in the school. Let me tell you about them. But nobody cared. Nobody listened to him. And it was really making him pretty mad because he had a great story to tell and nobody wanted to hear it. Until then he realized they didn't want to hear it because it didn't make any difference. When a child would go to his school, the child could get a good teacher or a bad teacher. Either way, that was the teacher. So it didn't make any difference to anybody if the teachers were good or bad. They were going to be it. That was the only game in town until we passed vouchers. And he thanked me because suddenly his phone started ringing off the hook. And he said, parents started calling him and saying, so, you know that thing you were saying about the teachers? Well, I wasn't really paying attention, but I think I want to hear that now. Can you tell us about our teachers? He was the happiest guy around. He had a great story to tell, and now people cared about it. That school improved rather dramatically in their academics. Yes, we see this across the country. So Florida, that I mentioned earlier, they were where you are now. They are at the top of the heap now. In fact, I just checked their scores going before COVID, after COVID. They haven't moved. They are still in a very strong position. So I'm just here to tell you, if Florida could do that, you certainly could too.
That's Adam Smith, the invisible hand.
The invisible hand, yes, thank you very much. Competition really does work. It does.
All right,
Question?
well,
Can we have one more question?
real quick.
I'll give a quick answer.
So I was a principal at a Catholic school when the textbook funding was taken away. And I went down to legislature, fought to get it back. We got it back through the end of June. They took it away again. So you're saying now that we can get it back?
They took it away again.
Well,
Okay.
So,
We'll
I
talk.
probably know more about this than you, because I'm here in New Mexico, no offense, but, obviously the courts have their say, but the legislature was able to. The question is about the textbooks for Catholic schools here in New Mexico.
legally it's allowed, but then the legislature can still say, we're not going to give those dollars to the non-public school. That's my understanding. That it's legislative prerogative, not a legal thing. We still have a very hostile legislature.
Well, that could very well be a legal thing. And my legal brain is, wait.
We can have that conversation.
Yeah, so maybe we'll go up to the US Supreme Court one more time, because that should not be. That should not be. I'm really glad you brought that up, so thank you very much. Yeah, so here to fight for you. You know, it's your right. Thank you.
Thank you.